Is the fact that no one's talking about the economic damage of Brexit a little bit ludicrous?
Well, it's a little bit dishonest, certainly.
Right. Now, it's been 4 years since Brexit officially happened, and a new report is asking, is it done yet? And what role will it play in the next general election? The report, Brexit and the State, was published by UK in a Changing Europe. I'm joined now by Professor Anand Menon, who is the Director of UK in a Changing Europe and Professor of European Politics and Foreign Affairs at King's College London. Anand, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alexis. How are you doing?
Very good. Lovely to have you on, Anand. It feels like, should we really be talking about Brexit? Is this something we should just let lie? But of course, it has affected our economy and, really importantly, our state. One of the big things that stand out is how bigger the civil service got post-Brexit. Tell us a little bit about what was the increase and why did that happen?
Well, since 2016, we've seen an increase of about 100,000, and that's not entirely down to Brexit, though Brexit is a significant factor because in taking back control, what that means is there are certain things that the European Union used to do for us that we now have to do by ourselves. That could be negotiating trade deals, it can be policing our borders with the European Union, it can be having the staff to manage our new independent immigration policy. So taking back control means doing more stuff yourself, which means more civil servants.
So was this idea, because a lot of people who pushed for Brexit was also the same political thinking of, for example, a smaller state. But we can safely say that that hasn't happened. 100,000 more civil servants, making the state a lot bigger. And of course, that must come at a cost, Anand.
No, it does come at a cost. But bear in mind, when people talk about a smaller state, they mean lots of different things. And one
Sure.
of the meanings around Brexit was a state that interfered less. So that wasn't so much about whether we have civil servants, that was about whether we regulated more or less. And even there, I mean, the other key finding of the report, apart from the rise in numbers, I think, is the fact that a lack of a clear vision about what Brexit should look like. Do we want to be Singapore on Thames and tear up all those EU regulations, or do we want to remain quite a European state? We've never really had that conversation. There's never really been a clear direction of travel set out by any government. And we're saying that actually, if you want to make Brexit work, you need to first figure out what you want Brexit to be and then put the resources in place to do it.
And Anand, is that because, would the government turn around and say, well, look, since Brexit was sort of fully implemented, we've had the pandemic, we've had the war in Ukraine, all these stuff has had to take precedent, leaving very little time to make Brexit work?
I think that's absolutely true. And if you think about the period since the referendum, since 2016, we spent 3 years arguing about whether to do it. We then had COVID. We then, as you said, had the war in Ukraine. There's been a lot of other stuff going on, and I have a degree of sympathy with that. I think the thing that you missed is there's a political angle to this as well, and there's a bit of a paradox here. Is if you think back to before the referendum, there was quite a clear group of Conservative MPs who were quite right-wing on economics, who saw Brexit as a way of reducing the size of the state in the sense of reducing regulation. What the Conservatives did in 2019 was they built an electoral coalition, including the Red Wall, that meant that those views didn't appeal to the whole of the party. So even within the Conservative Party now, what you see is real divisions about the sort of state they want us to be, and that has an impact on how you see Brexit and how you go about implementing it.
What about other issues that you picked out in the report? So the delays to the imposition of full checks at the GB-EU border. It seems incredulous, almost, that the fact that yes, Brexit has gone ahead, but we're still not imposing the checks that have to come into place. We keep delaying them. Why are we doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there is an irony there. If you think back to the slogan, take back control of our borders, we haven't really done that because, as you say, we're implementing the checks piecemeal through the rest of this year. The reason why we haven't, I'd say two reasons, and they're both quite interesting. The first is there was a genuine argument at the heart of government with some people like David Frost and Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, let's just leave it very, very light touch. Why should we disrupt trade? Why should we have a sort of tight border controls at our border? So there was an argument about whether you should do it at all. And the other argument that was sort of whispered about by Jeremy Hunt about a year ago was a fear that by imposing those border controls, you would increase the cost of living crisis because inflation on the goods affected would go up. Prices would go up because exporters to the United Kingdom would face those checks, which would slow things down and make it more expensive.
This, of course, coming from the same people. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg was one of the proponents of saying Brexit would mean cheaper food and cheaper shoes, if I
Yeah,
remember
but
correctly.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think Jacob was one of the ones who were arguing against the checks on the grounds of inflation. I think that was the Treasury, and the Treasury has the forecast to show that. But yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of tensions in these arguments. It's right.
You also saw that, for example, the 2.8 million EU and EEA nationals still to transition from pre-settled to settled status. I
Mhm.
mean, why is that taking so long?
I mean, for a variety of reasons. I think partly because we massively underestimated the number of people who would apply for settled status. At the time of the referendum, we were estimating about 3 million EU citizens here. There have been well over 6 million applications for settled status. So again, that's a question of resources, having the people in the Home Office to handle the applications. And of course, subsequently, the Home Office has been swamped by the need to deal with lots of other things. Implementing the new immigration system. We've got record numbers of immigrants coming in on work visas now, and also, of course, trying to deal with the small boats. So again, it's partly just a question of workload.
And before we go, do you think Brexit and the findings of this report are going to play a part in the oncoming election? Do you think Brexit is going to be a talking point?
Almost certainly not. And almost certainly not because both the major parties have a vested interest in not talking about it. And the one party that, I mean, the Scottish National Party will talk about it, I
Mhm.
think, because Brexit is part of their case for Scottish independence. They want to rejoin the EU. But the one party, national party, that you think might talk about it, who are the Lib Dems, have made a decision that they're going to downplay that issue for this election for whatever reason.
And is that, I mean, I know. I know you always have a very, very reasonable outlook on Brexit and a sort of very fair outlook on what it has meant for the country. But I mean, from all the reports, even from the OBR reports as well, we know that Brexit is having an impact on the economy. At the moment, we saw a budget that's trying to scrape pennies here and there,
Mhm.
trying to make life easier for people who are still going through a massive cost of living crisis. Is the fact that no one's talking about the economic damage of Brexit a little bit ludicrous?
Well, it's a little bit dishonest, certainly.
Right.
Uh, the fact of the matter is, leaving the single market and the customs union was always going to have a negative impact on the UK economy. The question was, if you were one of those people who thought, I want to have sovereignty and I'm willing to pay an economic price for it, then absolutely fair enough. But the debate has been dishonest. And I think, yes, I mean, it'll be very interesting if we get a Labour government that has said our priority is growth. We're going to be the fastest growing economy amongst the G7. At some point, you would think someone would say to them, well, actually, one of the most obvious ways in which you can increase growth is by reconsidering some of these Brexit red lines, which is something they've ruled out. So yes, there's a tension there.
It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. And as ever, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Anand Menon there. He is the Director of UK in a Changing Europe and, of course, Professor of European Politics and Foreign Affairs at King's College London. The report is really fascinating. You can find it on the UK in a Changing Europe website. It's entitled Brexit and the State. Really easy to find. Really interesting read.